finally, let's introduce our fourth speaker for this morning. He is an assistant professorial lecturer in history at the De La Salle University in Manila. He's currently a PhD candidate in anthropology, and he obtained his bachelor's and master's degrees in history from the University of the Philippines, Diliman. He is actively working as a public historian and served as co-author of the books Bonifacio, Ang Unang Pangulo, and Bayani Biographies, Andres Bonifacio, among a number of academic papers and articles. He is also a columnist with the regular column Shout Time in Abante, and also with the Manila Times. His talk this morning is titled Quincentennial Commemoration as a Filipino Reflection. So please welcome, without further ado, we know him already, but we're very glad to have him again, Professor Michael Charleston Xiao Chua. Good morning, sa'yo.
Thank you to our friend in our common love for heritage, Joel. And also to my co-panelists, especially Dr. Vernon Totanes and Dr. Danilo Herona, whom I respect so much. Makasaysayang araw po sa inyong lahat, historic day to the world. I thank the National Quincentennial Committee, or the NQC, and the Department of Foreign Affairs for the trust and for inviting me to be one of the speakers at the inaugural session of the Philippine International Quincentennial Conference, of the PIQC, the largest historical academic conference in the country to date, joining about 100 Filipino and foreign scholars, diplomats, officials, artists, and scientists to deliver lectures in 36 panels. However, the views in this paper are mine and mine alone in my personal capacity as a public historian, and does not in any way represent the NQC, to which I am not part of, and the institutions that I am affiliated to. I will be talking about the quincentennial commemorations in the Philippines. From here on, the QCP, as a sort of a self-reflection that we did together as a nation. Commemorations as public history are useless if we don't get anything from them. Of course, we honor our ancestors and our heroes through them, but they are dead and we'll never know about it. Yet, we honor the dead to give life to the living. Meaning, in rekindling the lessons of the past and the examples of our ancestors, we give sense and honor, or we give a sense of honor and identity to ourselves, and give meaning to our present earthly existence. Call me an essentialist, but meaning-making is a given. Critical historian Renato Constantino once wrote that the past must be usable. And just like what Italian historian Benedetto Croce stated, all history is contemporary history. I repeat, all history is contemporary history. Which means we do not research to flesh out an accurate, we do not research to flesh out, or we do not only research to flesh out an accurate past. But we don't study the past, or rather, we do research to flesh out an accurate past. But we don't study the past for the past's sake. Rather, we study the past always in the lens of what is usable for us in the present, or to explain why things are in the present. The ability to create stories and meaning that binds us to cooperate and have affinity with each other is what Israeli historian Yuval Noah Harari wrote as one of the reasons why human beings thrive on Earth in comparison to other species. Hence, it is meet that we should continue to make meaning of our stories so we can survive together as a people and as a nation. Our stories inspire us to have meaning in our existence, which in turn fuel our drive to achieve something in our everyday life. Many question the Quincentennial or the QCP as a commemoration of colonialism. Although the true start of the Spanish conquest will begin 40 years after the victory of Lapu-Lapu, the Magellan-Elcano expedition mapped the Philippines for future colonial conquests, as our former speakers had said, and it introduced Christianity, which later became a tool of that exact colonialism. Many more were confused how we can celebrate both the first circumnavigation of the Armada de Maluco and the victory at Mactan that killed its leader. These are not invalid observations and may result to furtherance of colonial mentality if the commemorations were unguided. Public historian Carmen Guerrero Macpil once asked, and I quote, "What if Magellan had not come to the Philippines? It is too late to speculate on the possibility of our having escaped the long paradoxical Spanish colonization with its strange combination of hideous cruelty, humane and beneficent policies, and incredible corruption and conservatism. It was too late even on that morning in March, more than 4 centuries ago, when a small bearded Portuguese mariner stood on the deck of his wooden ship and glimpsed through the mists of the Pacific the blue mountains of Sama." Unquote. From the onset of the QCP, the historians collaborating and working with the NQC has always insisted that the events of the 500 years or the events 500 years ago can be viewed not in the lens and the benefit of those aboard the European carracks, but of the maritime people on the shores, ergo, the Filipino people. We cannot change what happened in the past, but we sure can change how we view them, and in the process, how we also view ourselves. And so, with the numerous events, projects, and educational fora, these are just some of the things that came out about us in the light of the events of 1521 and our commemoration of it. 1. Filipinos are hospitable, magiliw. Our adeptness to entertaining foreigners can only be understood in the context of our 1,000-year history of maritime trade and our concept of humanity and pakikipagkapwa-tao, seeing the self in the other. This is the reason why our ancestors from what is now Giwan, Eastern Samar, fed the famished, thirsty, and dying crew of the expedition when they arrived on these islands on March 16, 1521. Without these contexts, we can fall to the shallow misconceptions that it is because we have the tendency to be docile vis-a-vis foreigners and subsequently because of our colonial mentality that we are magiliw. If we did not show pakikipagkapwa-tao in Giwan, I am sure the expedition continued to fade away and we will not be talking about this achievement of science and humankind. This belies what colonial history has always told us, that we were discovered by Magellan in the literal sense of the word. This is the number one thing the QCP wants to demolish. By using often the illustrations and the symbolisms of the 1593 Boxer Codex, we have offered a visual way of imagining our ancestors, especially the skilled Bagani with many batek or tattoos. That's why we call them Batikan. Through the humanity in Giwan, we can say instead of Magellan discovering us, that we discovered Magellan. But food historian Feliz Prudente Santa Maria instead proposed that in 1521, Filipinos and Spaniards actually discovered each other. The QCP was intended to be our tourism peg for 2021 if the pandemic did not happen. Yet, We also saw the cooperation of both Spaniards, Portuguese, and Filipino scholars and diplomats in contributing research and meaning-making to our complicated history, like what's happening now in the PIQC. A sort of scholarly bayanihan. But however we say it, we have emphasized with the QCP that the greatest resource of the Filipino nation are its people and our pakikipagkapwa-tao. Goodness towards your fellow or mabuting kalooban that brings well-being and peace or kaginawaan and kapayapaan at katiwasayan. We have shown the same humanity and pagmamahal sa kapayapaan to the Jews fleeing the Holocaust or to the White Russians fleeing communist persecution in China and brought them, of all places, in Giwan, Eastern Samar, site of the 1521 humanity. For the both people from Vietnam fleeing conflict, not because we are a weak people, but because we know how to give despite of the things we lack. Number 2, Filipinos have a creative spirit, malikhain. Our ancestors from 1521 expressed their faith, worldview, and valor through their tattoos, through their burial practices, through their marine vessels. We usually practice war only with just causes, and as the warriors of Mactan showed in their battle with Magellan, we can defeat a formidable enemy using our innate skills and strategy. It is the creative spirit that we show as we continue to express our culture and being through our artists, through our scientists, through our freedom fighters who use creative resistance as we face the many challenges thrown to us by history. The various entries in the Quincentennial Art Competition and the Lapu-Lapu Monument Design Contest are a testament to that creative spirit. Number 3, Filipinos are victorious, matagumpay. Many times, we commemorate more our defeats, like the battle at Pinaglabanan and the fall of Bataan. True enough, our continuing struggle for true liberation is hard and painful. But in carrying the spirit of Lapu-Lapu, whose first victory against the Spaniards inspired our national heroes like Rizal, Ponce, Jacinto, and Aguinaldo, the QCP made us also emphasize how we won the revolution in 1898 and defeated Spanish colonialism after 300 years to give birth to the Filipino nation, and how our guerrillas won the war for us against the Japanese invaders during the Pacific War in 1945. We also remember the victory and valor of our troops during the Korean War and those that keep the peace in Mindanao. With our love of country and fellow men, we are reminded that we shall overcome whatever challenges we are facing. 4, Filipinos have a dynamic culture. Our ancestors are not uto-uto. It is a fact that Christianity, which was introduced in 1521 with the bequeathing of the Santo Niño, became a tool of the colonizers to strengthen their hold in the islands. This was not being brushed aside by the QCP as debates and discussions about the implications of 1521 to our enslavement flourished, especially around the date this year that Yoyoy sang on March 16. But the QCP emphasized how our ancestors had agency in appropriating the new religion as a way of continuing their old cultures. And not only did they create a new, vibrant, and colorful expression of our pananampalataya to God, as seen through the Sinulog dance and the pamamasan of the Nazareno devotees, but also strengthened the Filipinos throughout their tumultuous history and actually inspired revolts and actions to stand up for the oppressed. We cannot cancel ourselves in rejecting what majority of Filipinos hold important. Filipino Christianity is therefore a victory of our culture. 5, Filipinos love politics. The QCP emphasized that Magellan, far from being influential to the lives of the ordinary Cebuanos in 1521 as was once thought, became a mere victim of the political struggle between Humabon and Lapu-Lapu. I once wrote how I see Humabon now, not as a subservient actor, but as an adept politician, the quintessential Filipino politician, like the ones that we have today. Also, it may have been an honest mistake, but one senator's erroneous claim during D-Day of the QCP last April 27, that Lapu-Lapu was a Tausug who came from Mindanao, was consistent to the political strategy of the present dispensation. What one colleague and friend calls the Visminization of history. Just as they appropriated the histories of Balanghiga and Buddaho into their narrative. Just the same as what the Marcoses did for Ilocos during their reign, when they proliferated the Biag ni Lamang throughout the country. The same time he was putting more Ilocanos in the armed services. Small steps in strengthening political bastions which may prove useful in the future. The QCP in itself raged in the midst of historical distortion and misinformation as a pretext to the 2022 presidential elections. On the other hand, environmental activists also used the QCP as a platform to highlight environmental issues, such as the quarrying near the site of the successful commemoration of the first landing of Magellan. Also, the libel case against the panel of quote-unquote poor historians who were only tasked by the NQC to know about the facts of a certain local event in 1521 demonstrated the lengths at which people will take to advance their point of view of history. A special mention should be given to historian attorney Sol Ofilenia Jr. for defending them from this assault to scholars who were only doing their job. Filipinos love using history for their politics. Always has been. But this is not to say that the QCP became a mere propaganda tool of the state. Far from it. To its credit, the NQC allowed and engaged cultural workers of various political persuasions, even critics of the government, and focused primarily on historical talastasan with a clear political agenda to push for a Filipino viewpoint of history which fosters love of country against a discredited but still prevalent colonial perspective, insecurity, and national inferiority complex. 6. Filipinos love to eat. Last April, during the climax of the QCP, Feliz Prudente Santa Maria's book, Pigafetta's Philippine Picnic, was launched, which told us of the Magellan expedition in the point of view of food. How is that? Here we learned our ancestors used food and wine to welcome visitors, cement friendships, and show pakikipagkapwa-tao. It reminds us of how our ancestors give food to the needy in times of distress, in our bayanihan, how we celebrate important days with our fiesta, and how we share our grief and pakikiramay in eating. The QCP showed us that Cebuanos know how to throw a party, just like Humabon. The pandemic did not stop the province, especially Lapu-Lapu City, being the ground zero of the QCP, or the epicenter of the QCP, in throwing a feast worthy of the 500 years. 7. Filipinos are flexible and resilient. I was aware of the many gargantuan plans prepared to commemorate this once-in-a-half-a-millennium event since 2018. The pandemic may have botched the QCP since March 2020, since a lot of its budget were reverted to mitigating the COVID-19 crisis. But despite throwing out many of the planned events, the NQC were able to act quickly, and by April 2020 had begun the webinars it has become famous for. Through Zoom and the very active NQC Facebook page, more people were able to participate in the QCP. The number of events initiated and coordinated by the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, or NHCP, the secretariat of the NQC were staggering, despite the small size of its secretariat. This is real public history and real inclusivity. Many people should be thanked, but mainly the national government officials and agencies who gave support to the QCP, the local officials who gave their cooperation throughout the country, the private sector for their interest, the teachers for echoing the QCP to their students, and most especially, NHCP Chair Rene R. Escalante, the captain of the ship who is seeing the QCP through, and my good friend Ian Christopher Alfonso, the Secretariat Supervisor, who never stopped getting ideas for the QCP, just like how Richard Carpenter was for the Carpenters. 8, and finally, Filipinos are heroic, bayani. In the end, the QCP emphasized what was obvious throughout Philippine history, as our theme song states, Bagani, ating lahi. We see this selfless service, or wani, the root word of bayani, through our teachers, overseas Filipinos, and our frontliners during the pandemic. The QCP was much a salute to them, as it is a salute to our culture. Again, because of the QCP, we are made aware or more aware that Filipinos are hospitable or magiliw. We have a creative spirit or malikhain, are victorious or matagumpay. We have a dynamic culture. We love politics, love to eat, are flexible and resilient, and are heroic. Bagad. Not since the Philippine Centennial did we have a most comprehensive commemoration which made us remember so much of our past. In fact, the 1998 Philippine Centennial only emphasized the birth of the nation, but the QCP, in talking about our ancestors, was able to bring out in their spirit many other instances in our history of victory and humanity that may not have seen the light of day. The QCP also tried to be inclusive. Since in following the route that Magellan Elcano took, we go beyond our usual narratives from Mactan to also include the people from Palawan and Mindanao, especially the Sultanates and the Moros. In the narrative of the first circumnavigation that changed the world. But more than that, in emphasizing our faith, crafts, and maritime culture that Pigafetta wrote about in the very first European account of our culture, we see our commonalities and diversity because we all live in the Austronesian world. And we are again reminded in the midst of regionalism and political division that the basis of our nationhood and unity can only be our culture and history. And as we tell the world the collective spirit of our ancestors in the context of the QCP, kagitingan, pananampalataya, pakikipagkapwa, pakikiramay, pagiging masayahin, bayanihan, pagiging mapayapa, and pagiging malikhain, we realize that it is also the spirit that we showed the world during the 1986 People Power Revolution, which we call Diwang EDSA, when Filipinos, soldiers and civilians finally refused to stop killing each other and instead show love to each other despite our differences. This is also the spirit we continue to show as our caregivers heal the world in the time of the COVID-19 pandemic. In the NQC Facebook page, someone commented about why we are having this Quincentennial International Conference and why we are talking about 1521 when we should be talking about the 2022 elections. He said, and quote, "No urgency for history now," unquote. We as a people seldom care about history. That is why many of us do not realize how great we are as a people, as we wallow in self-disrespect and inferiority and not learn from the mistakes of the past. How will we succeed if we keep on being divided? How can we succeed if we keep on hurting and insulting each other? Victory and humanity? Walang tagumpay kung walang pakikipagkapwa-tao. Wartime President Jose P. Laurel once said, and I quote, "We must unite, love one another, stop killing one another, because only the Filipinos can love Filipinos," unquote. The QCP also edified historians and public history in the continuing survival of the nation. As according to the historian's prayer, which was read in the opening ceremonies of this international conference, and I quote, "Help us become a bridge of understanding between the academe and the people, and make us learn the lessons of the past, so we could create solutions to our present problems toward attaining a better future. Despite the gifts that you have given us, may we stay humble and see our work as a way of serving our students, our readers, our publics. Yet, may we see ourselves as bearers of true enlightenment and justice, not enablers of darkness and ignorance. May the way we tell our stories of our past be relevant to our people, that they may learn something from it. May we bring history closer to the people, all for your greater glory and for the nation that you have given us. Amen." And unquote. Historytellers are like the babaylan of our ancestors. When they chant their meaningful stories or salaysay na may saysay, the bayan realizes that they have one past and one future together. The QCP theme, Victory and Humanity, reminds us even of what kind of Philippines or what kind of leader do we want to have after the next elections. Will he or she be a lapu-lapu who will show fortitude in the midst of our maritime disputes? Will he or she be a bayani who will give selfless service without expecting anything in return, who will not enrich their kin? Instead of calling it datu leadership, I would like to propose to look at pamumunong bagani, the protector of life, well-being, and honor of the people. Buhay, ginhawa, at dangal. In the midst of the narrative of hate, division, and violence all around us, the QCP is a breather, a refreshing reflection, to see ourselves in front of the magic mirror called history. An opportunity to look back as we look forward. To become a bagani begins with a decision to love our country. Love is shown in pakikipagkapwa-tao, which will lead to cooperation, bayanihan, which will ensure our kaginhawaan and the survival of the nation in the next 500 years and beyond. To the world, we say, our part in the first circumnavigation story tells them, if you come in peace or in need, we will show our humanity and pakikipagkapwa-tao. But if you meddle in our sovereignty, however hard, however long, we will fight until we attain victory. The Quincentennial is a celebration not of colonialism or of anything else, but it is a celebration of who we are and what we must become sa makabagong panahon. Isang mamamayan ng mga bagani, umiibig, nakikipagkapwa-tao, at nagtatagumpay. Daghang salamat sa inyo tanan. Maya Paldo Kekongan, Kabalen.
Wow, thank you very much, Professor Xiao Chua. That was a very, very empowering talk about the Quincentennial Commemoration as a Filipino reflection. So through his talk, Xiao Chua tries to make this celebration of the Quincentennial as a personal reflection, being a Filipino. No, he emphasized on how our historians and academics who are participating in this Quincentennial attempts to put light on the maritime lives of the Filipino people, and therefore correcting various misconceptions that have endured for a very long time about us Filipinos, and how the concept of the pakikipagkapwa or humanity of the Filipinos, especially those Filipinos in G1, became a turning point of the Armada de las Moluccas. He also explained to us the 7 main Filipino values fostered in 1521. Of course, being hospitable, being creative, victorious, culturally dynamic, loves politics, loves to eat, and being flexible and resilient, and finally, being heroic. There are actually 8 of them. All of these 8 Filipino values still prevalent for all of us Filipinos today. Sabi nga ni may nag-chat dito, sabi ni Rainier Margallo, gusto ko nang kumain pero di ako makaalis kasi ang sarap pakinig kay Professor Xiao. That was a really good one. And all right, thank you again, Professor Xiao. At this point, for the next 15 minutes, we will now open the floor to questions and comments from our audience. So I have another question from our Q&A section, this time coming from Rose Paz Narvaja Cornista. I think this is directed to Professor Xiao Chua. Professor Xiao, will our education curriculum change the perception of the Philippines being, quote unquote, discovered by Magellan? Or is this being undertaken already? History should focus on the rich and cultural history that existed prior to the visit of Magellan. I think it's a statement by Rose.
Thank you. Curricular review, Joel, is very hard to do. Especially because may bureaucracy yan sa Department of Education. Pero we can cut that because we as teachers, despite the fact that there are what we call competencies, we can add already. Kasi kaya nga we do all these webinars That's why we do all these conferences and Zoom and all of that, so that we can include all the learnings that we have in the quincentennial commemorations. But also, in all fairness to the Department of Education, they became active, especially in the since March, in promoting the quincentennial, its events, and a lot of things. And in fact, this Quincentennial International Conference was already promoted to all the teachers of the Department of Education. And the incoming event, Lapu-Lapu ang Dato ng Mactan Musical, on Sunday, in which I was the historical consultant, is also being promoted by the Department of Education to their teachers and students. So let us focus on the little things that we can do. Post about the commemorations, post about the things that you have learned in the conferences. We can use our voice, social media, and I think that is one thing that we can do. And then we talk to the USEX so that we can begin doing more modules about this theme. And by the way, we are releasing the module for the documentary Kaagi and the Santo Niño in connection to the Quincentennial Commemorations. The modules will be available, and it is in the format of the Department of Education. It was done by Mr. Danilo Lumabas, a DepEd teacher. So please watch out for that. You can use that as well.
Thank you, Professor Xiao. I think we're running out of time, but I just want to really call this question because it's a really, really good one. And I would like to invite our 3 panelists to have a take at this. Okay, this last question for this panel comes from Christina Miranda. Ito, should there be a qualification or differentiation of the heroism of Lapu-Lapu versus that of Rizal, Bonifacio, and other heroes during the Spanish colonial rule, considering the peculiar historical background against which the Battle of Mactan was set, like the Humabon Lapu-Lapu political rivalry? I think the implicit question there is, what does it really take to become a hero? Should there be differentiations of heroism? Anyone can answer. Yes, Xiao.
Okay, I'll begin. All heroism, and in fact, all personages in our history should be contextualized. Okay? So if we have a topic wherein we're talking about Rizal, then we contextualize Rizal's heroism against his time, vis-a-vis even Bonifacio's heroism. Diba? It can be different. And of course, Lapu-Lapu's heroism, which some people would say irrelevant to the national narrative because it was just a skirmish, a political a rivalry between local political factions. But the problem is there are also what we call histoire of the longue durée, meaning this is a history of consciousness. What does it mean? Even if Filipino heroes lived in different times, you have the frontliner, you have the OFW, you have the World War II guerrilla, the Katipuneros, the propagandists, and our Bagani. They are still held together by the concept of kabayanihan in the Filipino context, which we discuss in other forum, the concept of Bagani. With the concept of Bagani, which came from the word bayani or came from the Austronesian word wani, which is selfless service without expecting anything in return. So you fight for your country without expecting anything in return, in true service. And if you're going to look at it, all of these people who help their country, whether they're heroes or what we call personages that are known, or they are ordinary people, are bound by this one concept, and that if we emphasize this enough, maybe we will inspire the young to do the same even without dying for their country. In fact, the challenge is ay hindi yung mamatay ng dahil sa iyo, kundi yung mabuhay ng dahil sa iyo. Diba? And with that, hopefully, I'm sorry if I'm being romantic here. I'm always am. We make the world a better place. Diba? So, Miss Universe question.
Thank you, Shao. So, with that, we end this panel D. This has been your moderator, Joel Aldor from Grupo Kalinangan, a proud member of the Local Historical Committees Network of NHCP. Magandang tanghali sa inyong lahat. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Nice to be with you all in the panel. Salamat.
So for our Zoom attendees, the technical team has emailed the link to our evaluation form, especially those who have registered for this panel. This will also serve as today's attendance sheet. You will receive your certificates of attendance and certificate of participation upon completion of the evaluation form. This Zoom webinar will be closed in 5 minutes. So maraming salamat po. Have a good lunch. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.